Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most dramatic political moments Eastern Europe has seen in years, as Belarus appears to collapse overnight under the weight of mass protests, internal betrayal, and a regime pushed to the edge. What started as scattered demonstrations has now evolved into a full-blown national crisis that threatens the very survival of the current power structure. For years, Belarus was often described as one of Europe's most tightly controlled states, a place where dissent was quickly silenced and loyalty to the leadership was enforced through fear. But recent events have shattered that image almost instantly. Streets once patrolled exclusively by riot police are now filled with ordinary citizens, standing shoulder to shoulder with uniformed soldiers. The most shocking development is the role of the military. Soldiers, who were long seen as the backbone of regime security, are now openly refusing orders. In some cities, they have removed their helmets, laid down their shields, and joined protesters chanting for change. This single shift has transformed protests into something far more dangerous for those in power. Crowds gathered in major cities after reports spread on social media showing troops refusing to disperse demonstrators. Videos showed young conscripts embracing civilians, some even waving national flags associated with the opposition. These images traveled faster than any official statement, igniting hope and courage across the country. The protests themselves did not appear overnight. They were the result of years of economic frustration, political repression, and broken promises. Wages stagnated while prices rose. Opportunities shrank, especially for young people. Many Belarusians felt trapped in a system where loyalty mattered more than talent or hard work. The latest spark came after yet another controversial political decision that many citizens saw as proof the regime had no intention of reform. What followed was an explosion of anger that could no longer be contained. Workers walked out of factories, students left classrooms, and pensioners joined marches, despite the risks. Initially, security forces responded, as they always had. Roads were blocked, internet access was restricted, and arrests were carried out during the night. But something was different this time. The sheer number of people overwhelmed the system, and cracks began to show within the ranks of those ordered to suppress them. Reports soon emerged that some officers were refusing to carry out violent crackdowns. Others were quietly warning protesters of upcoming raids. The line between state power and public resistance began to blur, and that uncertainty spread fear inside the government itself. The moment soldiers openly joined protesters marked a point of no return. In authoritarian systems, the loyalty of the armed forces is everything. Once that loyalty wavers, the entire structure becomes unstable. Commanders can issue orders, but orders are meaningless if no one obeys them. State television attempted to downplay the events, describing them as isolated incidents or foreign provocations. But in the age of smartphones and live streaming, controlling the narrative became impossible. People could see the truth with their own eyes, and trust in official media collapsed almost completely. Inside government buildings, emergency meetings were reportedly held late into the night. Officials debated whether to negotiate, escalate force, or seek outside support. Each option carried enormous risks. Negotiation could signal weakness. Violence could push more soldiers to defect. Outside help could inflame public anger even further. Meanwhile, protesters continued to organize with surprising discipline. Volunteer groups distributed food, water, and medical supplies. Lawyers offered free assistance to detainees. Neighborhoods formed watch groups to warn of security movements. What began as protests slowly started to resemble a parallel civic structure. The atmosphere in the streets was tense but hopeful. People spoke openly about a future they had not dared imagine before. For many, this was the first time they felt their voices truly mattered. Fear, once a constant presence, was being replaced by determination. International reactions came quickly. Neighboring countries expressed concern and called for restraint. Human rights organizations demanded an end to violence and urged dialogue. Some governments warned against external interference, while others hinted at sanctions if repression continued. The leadership responded with defiant speeches, accusing enemies of trying to destroy the nation. But those words rang hollow as images of soldiers standing with protesters continued to circulate. Authority, once projected through strength, now looked fragile and uncertain. Economic pressure added another layer to the crisis. Strikes at major factories disrupted production and exports. State-owned enterprises, long a pillar of the economy, became centers of resistance. Workers who once avoided politics now openly demanded change, knowing their labor gave them leverage. Banks saw long lines as people withdrew savings, fearing instability. The national currency wobbled. Investors grew nervous. Each economic shock reinforced public anger and reduced the regime's ability to maintain control through financial incentives. Within the military itself, divisions deepened. Some senior commanders remained loyal, warning that chaos would follow any collapse of authority. Others argued that firing on civilians would permanently stain the army's honor. Younger soldiers, in particular, appeared unwilling to become instruments of repression. Families of soldiers joined protests. holding signs asking their sons and daughters not to turn weapons against their own people. This emotional pressure made it even harder for commanders to enforce obedience. The moral cost of repression was becoming too high. As days passed, the question was no longer whether the regime was cracking, but how fast and how far the collapse would go. Would there be a negotiated transition, or would events spiral into violence? No one could say for certain, but the old certainty of control was gone. Rumors spread about possible defections at higher levels of government. Some officials were said to be preparing exit plans, while others tried to position themselves for a post-regime future. Loyalty shifted from ideology to survival. Protest leaders called for calm and unity, emphasizing nonviolence. They understood that discipline was their strongest weapon. Any outbreak of chaos could justify a brutal crackdown and alienate sympathetic soldiers. Their strategy focused on endurance rather than confrontation. The role of women in the protests was especially visible. They formed human chains, led marches, and became powerful symbols of peaceful resistance. Their presence challenged stereotypes and made it harder for security forces to justify aggression. At the same time, fear had not disappeared entirely. Nighttime arrests continued in some areas. Activists went missing. Families waited anxiously for news. The risk was real, and everyone knew the situation could still turn dark. Yet, despite the danger, the momentum seemed to favor change. Each day more people joined. Each day fewer believed the official narrative. Each day the regime appeared more isolated from the society it claimed to represent. The collapse, if it comes, will not just be political. It will mark a psychological turning point for a nation long taught that resistance was futile. The idea that soldiers and citizens could stand together has already reshaped how people see power and possibility. For the region, the implications are enormous. Belarus sits at a strategic crossroads, and any transformation will ripple outward. Neighboring powers are watching closely, calculating how to protect their interests without triggering backlash. The coming days will be decisive. History shows that moments like this can lead to freedom or to tragedy, depending on choices made under pressure. The behavior of the military, the restraint of protesters, and the decisions of leaders will all shape the outcome. What is undeniable is that Belarus has changed. Even if the regime survives, it will never be the same. The myth of absolute control has been broken, and once broken, it cannot easily be repaired. People who once whispered their opinions are now speaking aloud. Soldiers who once followed orders without question are now thinking for themselves. A society long frozen by fear has begun to move. This is why the world is watching Belarus so closely. Not because the outcome is certain, but because the moment is historic. Overnight, a system that seemed unshakable began to crack. And through those cracks, the possibility of a different future is emerging. As events continue to unfold, one thing remains clear. The alliance between soldiers and protesters has changed the balance of power. Whether it leads to peaceful transition or further confrontation will depend on what happens next. For now, the streets remain filled with voices demanding dignity, accountability, and choice. The regime faces the greatest test of its existence, and the people of Belarus are writing a chapter of history in real time. We will continue to follow this story closely, because what happens here will not stay contained within one country. It will shape regional politics, influence future movements, and redefine what people believe is possible when fear finally breaks. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates as this extraordinary situation continues to develop.